Climb to the very top of the Great Pyramid, and you will not find a point. You will find a floor. Not a peak, not a tip. A flat stone platform wide enough to hold a small crowd, with room to turn around and walk in every direction. The most famous pointed shape in all of human history does not actually come to a point. Its summit is sheared flat, and somewhere between 8 and 10 meters of the original structure, around 16 full courses of massive stone, are simply gone. Not eroded away, grain by grain. Gone. And the single most important piece of the entire monument, the stone that was meant to crown it, the piece the Egyptians believed gave the pyramid its actual purpose, is nowhere on Earth that anyone can find. There is no photograph of it. There is no drawing of it. There is not one confirmed record that it was ever set in place. The top of the most studied building on the planet is missing. And to this day, no one can tell you for certain what stood up there or where it went. Today, we are going to walk through exactly what happened to the top of the Great Pyramid, what was supposed to be there, and why the tidy explanation printed in the guidebooks quietly skips the part that should bother you the most. Stay with me, because what once stood at that summit is not the strange part. The strange part is that we have stones exactly like it sitting in a museum in Cairo right now, recovered from other pyramids. From this one, the greatest of them all, we have nothing at all. Most people who visit Giza never even notice. They stand at the base, they tilt their heads back, and their eyes quietly fill in the point that isn't there. The brain finishes the triangle on its own. Most people walk right past the missing summit without ever seeing it. But that flat top is not a fresh scar from the last century. It is not a corner knocked off by a storm. Once you understand how much of it is gone and how long it has been gone, the story stops being about weather and starts being about something that was carried away on purpose. Something valuable enough that people risked their lives climbing nearly 500 feet of stone to take it. Let's start with the building itself, because the scale is what makes the missing piece so difficult to explain. This is the largest of the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau, built for a pharaoh named Khufu during the 4th dynasty. Construction wrapped up around 2560 BCE, which puts the structure at roughly 4,500 years old. When it was finished, it rose to about 146.5 meters, close to 481 feet. And it held the title of the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 3,800 years. Not the tallest in Egypt, the tallest on the entire planet. Nothing anywhere surpassed it until the great cathedrals of medieval Europe. They stacked more than 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing many tons each, into a base so precise it is level to within a couple of centimeters across an area larger than 9 football fields. Aligned to true north within a fraction of a single degree. And a civilization capable of that, capable of leveling acres of bedrock and aiming a mountain of stone at the North Star, apparently could not keep the top of its greatest achievement intact. That is the contradiction we are going to sit inside for the next several minutes. The base survives to a tolerance modern surveyors admire. The summit is a stump. And here is the detail almost no tour guide mentions. This is not a recent injury. When the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus visited in the 1st century before the Common Era, more than 2,000 years ago, he already described the apex as missing. He climbed up and measured the flat top he found there. So, did the Roman writer Pliny the Elder? A little later. The pyramid has been walking around without its head since before the Roman Empire reached its height. Now, the Egyptians did not think of the top of a pyramid the way we think of a roof. To them, the crown of the pyramid had a name, and the name was the benben. It was a small pyramid-shaped stone set at the very apex, and they called it the benbenet, tied to the sacred benben, the primeval mound. In their creation story, the benben was the first piece of solid land to rise out of the dark waters. At the beginning of the world, the mound the sun first touched. The word itself may come from an older root meaning to rise, the same idea as the sun climbing each morning. So the capstone was not decoration. It was the point of the whole thing. It was the mound of creation, the place where earth met sky, the stone that turned a giant stack of blocks into a machine for launching a dead king toward the sun. Read that again as an engineer rather than a priest, and it stops sounding like poetry and starts sounding like a specification. Not a myth, not a metaphor, a description of a functional object placed at a precise point for a precise reason. The most important stone, set last, at the summit, meant to catch and throw the light of the sun. Whatever the Great Pyramid was for, the answer was concentrated in the one piece we no longer have. And that is the thread I want you to hold on to, because it never gets tied off. What actually crowned the Great Pyramid, and where in the world did it go? Keep that question in your mind. We are going to sharpen it, and we are never going to fully answer it, because no one can. Here is where it gets strange, and this is the first clue. Look closely at that flat summit and do the arithmetic. The pyramid today stands at roughly 138 meters, down from its original 146.5. That missing height is not a thin skin of surface stone. It is around 16 courses of core blocks, each one weighing on the order of tons, stripped clean off the top of a structure nearly 500 feet in the air. The official line you will hear is erosion, wind, sand, time. And that explanation has a problem. Wind and sand do not lift multi-ton limestone blocks off the peak of a mountain of stone and make them vanish. They round edges, they polish. They do not disassemble the top 40 vertical feet of the tallest building in the ancient world and leave a clean, walkable floor behind. Something took those blocks down. Something with hands. And the shape of that flat top has been changing over the centuries in a way pure erosion cannot explain. When Diodorus measured the summit 2,000 years ago, he recorded a small platform, each side only a few meters across. Pliny recorded one smaller still. Today, that platform is far wider, roughly 10 meters on a side, 30 feet of open floor at the top of the world. The truncation did not happen once and stop. It grew. The top of the pyramid has been getting lower and flatter and wider for 2,000 years, which is exactly the signature you would expect if people kept coming back and taking more. Not a single ancient catastrophe. A slow, deliberate harvest. One block at a time. Century after century. And people did keep coming back. For generations, right up into the 20th century. Climbing the Great Pyramid was a tourist ritual. Travelers scrambled up the giant steps of the exposed core, sometimes hauled up by local guides, until they reached that flat summit and stood on the roof of the ancient world. In the mid-1900s, the top became a genuine gathering spot, a place where visitors sat, carved their names, and looked out over the desert from a stone platform where a golden crown was supposed to be. Think about the strangeness of that image. People eating lunch on the exact spot the Egyptians reserved for the holiest object they could build. The most sacred point in their entire cosmology reduced to a viewing deck. Every one of those visitors was standing inside the space where the missing piece belonged, and almost none of them ever asked what had been there or where it went. Because from up there, the loss is undeniable. You are not standing on a peak that eroded to a slightly rounded point. You are standing on a floor, a deliberate, walkable, roughly 10-meter platform of core blocks, cut off clean where the structure should keep rising for another 40 vertical feet. Wind does not carve a floor. Wind does not leave a level surface at the top of a mountain of stone. A floor is what you get when something is taken down, layer by layer, by people who could stand on what they were removing. For decades, scholars filed all of this under natural wear and moved on. But the missing top is only the beginning, because to understand what happened to the summit, you first have to understand what happened to the skin. And what happened to the skin of the Great Pyramid is one of the most quietly astonishing stories in archaeology, one that turns this monument from a victim of time into the target of an entire city. The pyramid you see today, that rough, stepped, sand-colored stack of blocks, is not what the Egyptians built. It is the core, the raw inner skeleton. It was never meant to be seen. Over that core, the builders laid an outer shell of around 144,000 blocks of fine white limestone, quarried across the river at a place called Tura and ferried over by the ton. These were not rough stones. They were cut and polished and fitted so precisely that the seams between them are thinner than a sheet of paper. You could run your hand across acres of that surface and barely catch a fingernail on a joint. And the stone was bright. Blindingly bright. Limestone is naturally reflective, and this was the finest, whitest, most tightly fitted limestone in the ancient world, spread across roughly 13 acres of sloped surface, with almost no seam to break it up. In full desert sun, the whole pyramid worked like a single enormous mirror, a smooth white geometric form, throwing light across the plateau with such force that ancient writers said it hurt the eyes to look at. Sailors reportedly spotted it glowing on the horizon from far out at sea. Picture it the way it actually stood. Not the rough brown staircase of blocks in the photographs, but a seamless slope of polished white, so bright it was painful, rising out of the desert to a point that caught even more light than the faces below it. For nearly 4,000 years, the Great Pyramid did not just sit in the sand. It burned in it. A mountain of white fire, visible for miles, capped by a summit built to gather and hurl the sun. And that is the part that makes the theft of the summit make sense. If the entire structure was engineered to throw sunlight, then the highest point was engineered to throw it hardest. The crown was not an afterthought stuck on top. It was the focal point of a machine the size of a small mountain. The single spot where the pyramid's whole purpose came together, which is exactly why it would have been the most tempting thing on the entire building to take. Then, on the 8th of August in the year 1303, a massive earthquake struck the region. The pyramid did not fall. It had already outlasted empires, and it was not going to be shaken down. But the quake did something almost worse. It loosened thousands of those flawless casing stones and left them lying free in the sand at the base, perfectly cut, perfectly polished, ready to use. And to the people of the nearby city, the math was obvious. Why quarry and shape new stone when 4,500 years of the finest masonry ever laid was sitting there for the taking? So they took it. For centuries, the Great Pyramid was mined for its own surface. That gleaming white stone was hauled down off the plateau and built into the growing city of Cairo. Around 1356, a ruler had huge quantities of it carried away to raise mosques and a fortress. Centuries later, in the early 1800s, a modern ruler stripped still more of it for a grand mosque of his own. The skin of the pyramid became the walls of a capital. Some of the most famous old buildings in Cairo are, quite literally, made from the surface of the Great Pyramid. It did not disappear. It was relocated block by block into a city until only the naked core was left. A handful of original casing stones still cling to the base, if you know where to look, and one lone piece even sits in a museum in Scotland, where you can stand next to a single fragment of the shine. Sit with what that means. The most recognizable building on Earth was slowly, methodically taken apart from the outside in and used as a stone quarry for 1,000 years. That is not a fringe theory. That is the documented history. And if crews were willing to climb this thing, to peel off its outer casing, block by block, for a millennium, then the missing summit is no longer a mystery of nature at all. It is the top of the shopping list, the highest and quite possibly the most valuable stones on the entire structure. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, subscribe now, because the next part is the piece the guidebooks are most careful to leave vague. Because that brings us to the third clue. And this is the one that turns a missing rooftop into a genuine void in the historical record. We know the casing was stripped. We can name the earthquakes and the rulers and the mosques, but the casing is not the crown. The crown was the benben, the pyramidion, the single capstone at the very summit. And when you go looking for it, you find something that stops you cold. Not damage, not a fragment, nothing. Here is why that silence is so loud. We know exactly what these capstones looked like, because we have them from other pyramids. In 1900, after reports of robbers working the desert cemeteries, an inspection team was sent out to a site called Dashur, on the east side of the ruined pyramid of a later pharaoh named Amenemhat. A dark block was found sticking out of the sand. When they cleaned it, they realized what they were looking at. It was a pyramidion, a genuine capstone, carved from a single piece of dense black stone, still almost perfectly intact after thousands of years. It stands about 1.4 meters tall, merely 2 meters across at the base, and weighs around 4.5 tons. And its faces are covered in inscriptions, hymns carved into the stone, calling on the sun god to open his face to the king so the king could cross the sky. That capstone now sits in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and you can stand in front of it and read the purpose of a pyramid's crown carved directly into the object. It is not the only one. The oldest capstone ever found was recovered in 1982, near the Red Pyramid, the very structure whose apex the Great Pyramid was built to surpass. Cairo's museum holds the largest collection of these pyramidia in the world, several of them gathered from across Egypt. And they tell a consistent story. During the age when the Great Pyramids were built, these crowns were carved from hard, prestigious stone, diorite or granite, or the finest limestone, and then covered in gold or electrum, a bright alloy of gold and silver, so that the very tip of the pyramid would blaze like a star when the sun hit it. That was the whole design. A gilded point at the top of a white mirror, the brightest spot on the brightest object for miles, the place where the sun god was believed to physically touch the monument each dawn. Some of these capstones were later defaced, their inscriptions deliberately scratched away, in a period when Egypt's religion turned violently toward the worship of the sun disk alone, and older names were struck from the record. People did not just lose these stones. They fought over what was carved on them. They mattered enough to deface, enough to bury, enough to guard. Now hold the two facts side by side. The Great Pyramid was aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, leveled across acres to the width of a couple of fingers, built to a mathematical precision we still study today. The people who raised it did not leave things unfinished by accident. They were, if anything, the most obsessive builders in history. And yet the record hands us a leveled, aligned, mirror-clad monument with an empty space where its most sacred and most valuable stone should be, and not one line of writing to explain the gap. Either the crown was there and was taken so completely that it erased its own history, or it was deliberately never placed on the one pyramid that most demanded it. Both possibilities are strange. Neither is comfortable, and there is no third answer sitting in a museum drawer waiting to settle it. So here's the shape of the problem, stated plainly. We have the crowns of lesser pyramids. We have them in black stone and inscribed granite. We know they were gilded to catch the sun. We know they were the most sacred and most valuable single element of the entire structure. And from the Great Pyramid, the largest, most ambitious, most precisely built monument in the ancient world, the one pyramid we would most expect to be crowned with the most magnificent benben ever made. We have not recovered a single trace. No capstone, no fragment, no drawing, not one ancient record that describes it in place. The most important stone on the most important building on Earth left no shadow in history at all. Think about what a gilded capstone would have meant to anyone who could reach it. A pyramid-shaped block of hard stone, sheathed in gold, sitting at the highest, most visible point in Egypt. If casing crews spent 1,000 years climbing this structure just to pry off plain white limestone for construction rubble, what do you imagine happened to a gold-covered stone waiting for them at the summit? You do not need a conspiracy to answer that. You need only human nature. The crown would have been the first thing taken and the last thing anyone would ever admit to melting down. And none of this is guesswork. You have to take on faith. This is the part where the physical evidence is sitting in front of us, measurable and touchable. The height loss is not a legend. Survey after survey has recorded it. The drop from about 146.5 meters to roughly 138. The missing courses counted off one by one. The casing is not a legend either. You can walk to the base of the Great Pyramid today and put your hand on the few original casing blocks still locked in place and see for yourself how smooth and how tightly fitted they were, angled to form a surface that once ran unbroken to the sky. You can travel to a museum in Scotland and stand beside a single casing stone carried out of Egypt, a physical piece of that lost white shine. And you can walk into the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and stand in front of the recovered pyramidia of other kings, the black inscribed crowns that survived when their pyramids did not, and read the solar hymns still cut into the stone. Every piece of this puzzle exists and can be examined. Every piece except the one that matters most. We can hold the skin. We can hold the crowns of lesser pharaohs. We cannot hold or even picture the crown of Khufu. And the trail does not just go cold. It was paved over. The idea of the benben was so central to this belief system that the original sacred benben stone was kept in a temple in the ancient city the Greeks called Heliopolis, the city of the sun, the oldest center of solar worship in Egypt. That temple is gone. The city is gone. Both now lie buried beneath the modern suburbs of Cairo, the same city built in part from the pyramid's own stripped skin. The physical heart of the entire benben tradition sits somewhere under streets and apartment blocks, unexcavated, unreachable. It was sacred, it was mapped, and then it was quietly buried under a living city. Now, here is where the story takes on the texture of every great unsolved mystery. Every honest answer we have leaves a gap. The official explanation for the missing top is erosion and casing removal. And that explanation is partly true. But it stops exactly where the interesting question begins. Yes, the casing was stripped. Yes, the summit was quarried. But nobody kept a receipt for the capstone. No medieval account says, "We took the golden benben down on this date, and it weighed this much." No ancient text describes it standing there in the first place. The single most important object on the structure passes through thousands of years of human record without a mention, and every explanation for its absence is a shrug. It was probably looted. It was probably stripped. It was probably melted. Probably. On the most documented building in human history, the crown is a blank. Now, does any of this prove the wildest version of the story, that the Great Pyramid was topped with a solid slab of pure gold or some lost device, deliberately hidden or spirited away by people guarding a secret? Probably not. Let's be honest, because the truth here deserves better than hype. The mainstream account carries real weight. The 1303 earthquake genuinely did loosen the casing. Rulers genuinely did cart that stone into Cairo for their mosques, and the records of it survive. Erosion over 4,500 years is real, and the top of any structure takes the worst of the wind and the weather. A solid gold capstone of any real size would have weighed several tons and been an almost impossible object to make, and an even easier one to loot, unlikely to survive even a few decades once the tomb was breached. And at least one respected pyramid specialist, Rainer Stadelman, the same researcher who recovered that oldest capstone in 1982, argued that some pyramids may never have received a finished pyramidion at all, that the crown was sometimes intended and never actually placed. Maybe that is what happened here. Maybe the Great Pyramid summit was never truly finished. That is a serious possibility, and it deserves to be on the table. But strip away every wild theory, discard the gold, discard the lost technology, discard all of it, and you are left with a set of plain facts that are arguably stranger than the fantasy. A 4,500-year-old building, leveled to within centimeters across acres of desert, aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, wrapped in 144,000 mirror-polished stones fitted tighter than a sheet of paper, bright enough to blind. A structure so valuable that an entire city spent 1,000 years mining it for parts. A summit that has been sheared flat and growing flatter since before the Roman Empire. A crown that every other pyramid of its class is documented to have carried, gilded and inscribed and sacred, and that this one, the greatest of them all, has left behind not a single trace of. You do not need aliens to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually there and to notice what is actually missing. And if even the modest version of this is true, it means something uncomfortable about the story we tell ourselves. It means the most famous building on Earth is incomplete and has been for so long that we have forgotten to be surprised by it. It means we file this monument under solved, we put it on the postcards, we let the eye finish the point that isn't there, and we quietly ignore that its single most important piece is unaccounted for. It means our picture of the ancient world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch with the most important line left blank. And if we are missing a piece this large, this central, off a building this famous, the single most studied monument on the entire planet, then how much are we missing from the ruins we have barely touched? Every pyramid was a machine for reaching the sun, and the benben was the part that touched it first. It was the mound of creation. It was the place where earth met sky. It was the stone that rises. And on the Great Pyramid, the stone that rises is the one thing that fell out of history entirely. We have the crowns of kings who came after Khufu, sitting under museum glass. We have the hymns they carved, promising the sky to the dead. From the man who built the largest of them all, we have a flat stone floor and a silence 4,500 years deep. So here is the one question that will not let go. If the crown of the Great Pyramid was the most sacred, most valuable, most carefully made object on the most important structure in the ancient world, then where is it now? Was it gold? Carried off and melted into coins that spent centuries changing hands, unaware of what they had been? Was it a black inscribed stone lying shattered somewhere under the sand of the plateau, waiting exactly where it fell? Was it built into the wall of a mosque, unrecognized, holding up a doorway in a city that never knew? Or was it never there at all, an unfinished thought at the top of a finished miracle? Every one of those answers changes what the Great Pyramid was, and not one of them can be proven. The pyramid is still standing on the Giza Plateau, exactly where it has stood since before the first word of recorded history was written. Millions of people walk past it every year, tilt their heads back, and see a perfect point that is not there. And at the very top, where the mound of creation was meant to blaze in the sun, there is a flat stone floor, open to the sky, worn wider by 2,000 years of hands reaching for whatever was up there. The crown is gone. The record is blank. And whatever once stood at the summit of the Great Pyramid, catching the first and last light of every single day, is still out there somewhere, melted or buried or built into a wall, waiting in the one place we have never thought to look.